Ladies and gentlemen, look at the scoreboard. Look at the tape. The match is over. The echoes of the crowd have faded and the timeline has been permanently altered. The moment wasn't just an upset. It was a complete paradigm shift. And as of the afternoon of June 18th in Berlin, we have officially crossed into uncharted territory. The deadline for the tennis establishment to figure out who Alexandra Eala really is has come and gone. It is in the wind. It is history. And what we are left with in the aftermath is not a question mark. It is not a debate, and it certainly isn't a fluke. What we are left with is the deafening sound of a 21-year-old completely shattering the statistical realities of the sport. We need to have a very serious, very uncomfortable conversation about what just happened on that grass court, because the mainstream sports media machine is spinning so fast it is about to come off its axis. They drop their meticulously curated highlight packages, and if you actually sit down and look at the coverage, if you strip away the shock value headlines and the sympathetic nodding of the pundits, you will find a level of analytical illiteracy that is frankly terrifying for the future of tennis journalism. I cannot believe what I am seeing. I watched the match, I looked at the 25 days that preceded it, and I found myself shaking my head in disbelief because it confirms everything we have suspected for months. The analysts do not understand the sheer gravity of what this player from the Philippines just executed. We have to start with the object that is going to define this entire narrative. It is an image that should be studied in sports psychology classes as an example of absolute grounding in the face of unprecedented pressure. For 1 hour and 32 minutes inside a black bag with a half-open zipper sat a smartphone. Let that sink in. Let it marinate. A phone sitting on grass court soil doing absolutely nothing. On the surface, it sounds like an irrelevant detail. It sounds like a footnote. But when you peel back the layers, it exposes the fundamental core of who Alexandra Eala is. That phone received no messages that anyone was allowed to answer. It recorded no audio. It captured no celebration. It just sat there in the shadows while the 21-year-old, ranked 35th in the entire world, stood across the net from the world number 2, Elena Rybakina, and did something that statistically she was simply not supposed to do. To understand why the phone call she eventually made broke containment the way it did, why it mattered to millions of people in group chats across the globe, you cannot just look at the 92 minutes on the court. You have to look at the 25 days that came before it, because back in March in Miami, Eala had beaten the world number 2 as well. And in the months that followed, a narrative began to form quietly in the hushed language that tennis insiders use when they don't yet want to commit to an opinion. They asked, was Miami the real Alex Eala, or was Miami the exception? And then came May 26th, Roland Garros. Eala walked off court Simone Mathieu after losing in straight sets to an American teenager named Iva Jovic. 4-6, 2-6, first round, gone. Jovic was ranked outside the top 75 at the time. This was the data point that the doubters seized upon. This was the moment the establishment tilted the question toward the second answer, whispering that maybe Miami was just a flash in the pan. When you suffer a loss like that in front of a French crowd that has absolutely no particular reason to remember your name, the fallout is usually loud. But here is the first piece of evidence of Eala's elite mentality. There was no extended press conference. There was no preserved primary statement. There was no long, dramatic monologue about what went wrong and how her feelings were hurt. There was just the score, and then the absolute silence of a player walking off a clay court in late May with a grass season ahead of her and no obvious place to start it. She could have skipped the next few weeks. She could have rested. She could have waited around for a bigger wild card or picked a friendly WTA 250 with a soft draw to pad her ego. She did the exact opposite. The second piece of evidence is what happened next. She went to Birmingham. She entered a WTA 125 event. This is the kind of tournament that doesn't make the highlight package on global tennis shows. It is a rebuild without a spotlight. And on June 7th, after a grueling rain-delayed semifinal that went 2-6, 6-4, 6-3 against Rebecca Masarova, Alex Eala hoisted the Lexus Birmingham Open Trophy. Her second career WTA 125 title. Almost no international tennis publication outside the Philippines covered it with any real depth. 11 days before her phone would become the center of the sporting universe, she was grinding out a title that most casual tennis fans could not even name. And then she flew to Berlin on a wild card. She had never played this tournament in her life. She had never set foot on that specific grass for a main draw match before. Berlin was not just a tournament. Berlin was a referendum on her identity. And the draw was an absolute nightmare. If you were designing a path for a player trying to rebuild their confidence, you would not draw this one. Round of 64, Donna Vekic. Vekic, by the way, was the exact same player who would go on to make the Queen's final the very same week. Eala beat her. Round of 32, Nicola Bartunkova. Eala beat her. And then came the round of 16, Elena Rybakina, the world number 2. The two-time Grand Slam finalist, the 2022 Wimbledon champion, the heavy, undeniable favorite. Let's be crystal clear about something right now. There was no villain on that court on June 18th. The story was not Eala versus Rybakina as bitter adversaries. Rybakina showed up to play. She was not careless. She was not disrespectful. She hit 13 aces in that match. She opened the very first game with 3 aces in a row. She built a massive 4-1 lead in the first set in just 24 minutes. For that first half hour, it looked exactly like the insurmountable gap the rankings predicted. But then the paradigm shifted. Eala broke. Then she held. Then she broke again. She took the first set 7-5. A 21-year-old playing on grass on debut, down 4-1 against the number 2 player on the planet, just stormed back and took the set. Take a breath here, because the next part is harder to comprehend than the first. Leading against a champion like Elena Rybakina is not the same thing as holding the lead against Elena Rybakina. The first set was the heavy swing. The second set was the ultimate psychological test. Tennis at this elite level is rarely decided by the massive highlight reel shots. It is decided by the small, almost invisible micro decisions made when the nervous system starts screaming, asking whether the body actually remembers what it was doing 4 games ago. That is where most upsets, even the really good ones, quietly come apart at the seams. This brings us to the 5th and most crucial piece of evidence. Zoom in on one specific game inside that second set. Eala is up 5-4. She is serving for the match. The score goes to 15-30. She has one single mistake from being broken back. She has one loose swing from a tiebreak she might not survive against a woman with a cannon for an arm who has already fired 13 aces past her. The tension is suffocating. And what does the 21-year-old do? She hits her 4th ace of the entire match. 2 points later, the match is over. 1 hour and 32 minutes. Across the entire afternoon, the WTA's own recap would later note that Rybakina committed more than 23 unforced errors. But the number that actually mattered, the metric that defined the afternoon, was that single serve in that single game with the second set dangling on a wire. That is the part of the match nobody clips for social media. That is the silent mastery that casual observers completely miss. And then the 6th piece of evidence, the aftermath, the phone. Match point landed, the stadium erupted. Eala walked over to her bag, unzipped it, and pulled out the device that had been sitting in the dark for an hour and a half. With the stadium microphone still completely live, broadcasting to the world, she FaceTimed her father, Mike. Her mother, Riza, was on the line, too. The audio wasn't a scripted PR triumph. It was raw, simple, and beautifully ordinary. In her own words, captured in the interview that the WTA's editorial desk published just hours later, I called my dad. I said, "Oh my God," and we were just screaming, and my mom was there too. And I don't know, I'm just really happy. There was no grand rehearsed speech. There was no defiant statement to the haters. There was a 21-year-old doing the most beautifully ordinary thing imaginable inside the most extraordinary 90 seconds of her entire year. And then she delivered the line that, more than any down-the-line winner or perfectly placed ace, is what this entire analysis has been pointing at from the very beginning. Her voice was still uneven. Her smile was still incomplete. She looked into the microphone and said, "I am a little foggy right now. I'm still shaking. And I was shaking on match point, too." That is the confession that changes everything. When asked to pick a highlight word for her performance, she didn't say talented, she didn't say ready, she chose the word brave. Listen to the absolute maturity in that word choice. Bravery is not the absence of fear, it is the brutal point-by-point management of it. She was shaking when she hit that crucial 4th ace at 15:30. She was shaking when she walked to the net to shake Rybakina's hand. And she was still shaking when she heard her parents' voices come through the speaker of her phone. She understands that her own nervous system was the true opponent she had to manage, and that this management was a deliberate, agonizing choice she had to make on every single point, not some mythical Zen state she magically arrived at. But the story doesn't end there, and if you think it does, you are completely missing the point. The seventh piece of evidence is the one that slams the door permanently shut on the word lucky. Less than 24 hours after the Rybakina masterclass, Eala walked right back onto that exact same court for a quarterfinal matchup against Elena Svitolina. We are talking about a former world number 3, the number 6 seed at this tournament, one of the most historically experienced and dangerous grass court players on the entire tour. Final score, 6-3, 6-4, Eala. You can call one match an upset. You can spin a narrative about an opponent having an off day, but you absolutely cannot call 2 consecutive matches against top-tier opposition in straight sets on your tournament debut anything other than what they are: cold, hard evidence. That victory over Svitolina made it her 6th career top 10 win. And here is the dirty little secret the doubters refuse to acknowledge. All 6 of those victories came in straight sets. 4 of them were against top 5 opponents. The most credible voice on what happened that week is not some talking head on a panel, it is the institution itself. Look at the WTA's own official recap published on WTAtennis.com on June 18th, just before the Svitolina match. It stated, it was the second WTA tour driven by Mercedes-Benz meeting between Eala and Rybakina, and the head-to-head now sits at 1 win apiece. The result also marks Eala's 5th career top 10 victory, all in straight sets, with 4 of those coming against top 5 opponents. That sentence is not emotional. It is statistical. It is the tour's own scoreboard talking. And let me tell you something about the scoreboard. The scoreboard does not care about your narratives. The scoreboard does not care about your preseason predictions. The scoreboard says this player has now executed this level of dominance 5 times against this specific caliber of opponent and never once needed a third set to do it. 24 hours later, with Svitolina added to the wreckage, that number officially became 6. This is the part where the reality of the situation transcends a single tournament in Germany. As of June 15th, Eala was sitting at 35th in the world. As of June 19th, with the Rybakina and Svitolina scalps officially added to her resume, the live rankings tracked by the sport's statisticians had her violently climbing into territory that fundamentally alters the landscape of the sport. We are talking about territory that matters for Wimbledon seedings. She is actively overtaking established names in the projected order, players like Siniakova, players like Vekic, players like Raducanu. Now, sure, those projections are not official until the Wimbledon cutoff is locked in, but the trajectory, the direction of this train, it is completely unambiguous. Look at her grass court record in 2026. It now reads 8 wins and exactly 1 loss. Inside of 3 incredibly condensed weeks, she has systematically dismantled Donna Vekic, Elena Rybakina, and Elena Svitolina. And she has done it on a surface that, historically speaking, gives Asian players the absolute steepest learning curve in the sport. By the time you process this reality, she will be walking into yet another locker room. Berlin, June 20th, the semifinals. Standing across from her will be Linda Noskova, the only player in this entire tournament she has previously lost to back in March. That match is happening tonight. I am not here to predict the outcome of that match. What I am here to tell you with absolute certainty is this. Regardless of whether Eala wins or loses against Noskova, the body of work that produced that phone call to her parents has already been built. It is set in stone, and it cannot be unbuilt, undone, or erased by a single result. The phone call wasn't the ceiling of her potential. The phone call was merely the sound of a door being kicked wide open. It would be completely dishonest to tell this story without sitting just for a moment in the dark place where it all could have gone horribly wrong. May 26th, Paris. The locker room after getting run off the court 4-6, 2-6 by Iva Jovic. There is no long quote preserved from that afternoon about what hurt or what she was thinking or how unfair it all was. There is only the score and the relentless, undeniable work that followed it. The choice to grind in Birmingham instead of waiting for a handout. The choice to fly to Berlin and step onto unfamiliar grass against a nightmare draw without asking for a single favor. Exactly 23 days separated the bitter defeat in Paris from the monumental victory over Rybakina. Her visible response to that Parisian failure was not a carefully crafted social media sentence. It was the absolute gauntlet she ran through, and that is the definitive answer to the question the city of Berlin was asking her. So here is the room she finds herself in now. Literally, on the evening this reality check hits the airwaves, she is sitting in a semi-final locker room in Berlin. It's a room she had never entered before this week. But the bigger room, the one the global rankings actually describe, is the one this entire story has been quietly, methodically building toward for nearly a month. It is the room of players who have beaten the world number 2 more than once. It is the elite room of players who boast 6 career top 10 wins, every single one of them executed in straight sets. It is the room of players whose raw, shaking, emotional on-court interview in a tournament they entered on a wild card gets ripped and republished by the WTA's own global feed, carried by ESPN, broadcast by GMA, and plastered across Olympics.com inside the exact same news cycle. That is an incredibly small room. There are not many people walking the earth who hold a key to it, and somewhere in that room, resting inside a black bag with a half-open zipper, sitting on a bench before a different match on a different court, is the phone. It is sitting exactly where it always sits. It is doing absolutely nothing for now. It is just waiting for the next 90 seconds when the world stops spinning, the final point is won, and it is picked up again. 1 hour and 32 minutes, 25 days of absolute grinding. One word: brave. It is time for the tennis world to wake up. It is time to stop looking at the rankings from a month ago and start looking at the balance of power today. It is time to respect a 21-year-old who took the hardest possible path, stared down the absolute best in the business, managed her own shaking hands, and served her way out of the fire. Because if the pundits don't, if they continue down this road of questioning whether her success is a fluke or an exception, they are going to wake up and find that the entire landscape of the WTA has shifted, and they are left standing in the dust with absolutely no idea what just happened. I'm out. I'm telling you, stop doubting, get real, look at the numbers, and for the love of the game, respect the bravery it takes to hit an ace when your whole body is telling you to fold. Tell me what you think in the comments. Is this the beginning of a dominant era for Alexandra Eala? Or is the establishment going to keep moving the goalposts? Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, because this story isn't over. It's just getting started, and on the grass courts of Wimbledon, it's going to get absolutely wild. Peace.